The new leadership should create jobs and employment.
Robert Mugabe is gone after nearly 4 decades. We ask, what does Zimbabwe's next leader have to do to revive an economy on its knees? Also on the programme, the UK's Chancellor of the Exchequer unveils his government's budget. As Philip Hammond tries to cool a red-hot property market, we meet one couple struggling to buy a roof over their heads. And a peek into your future health. Home genetic testing is a fast-growing industry, but would you rely on its results? Hello, I'm Azhar Sukri. This is Money Talks. Robert Mugabe's 37-year presidency plunged Zimbabwe to the depths of economic despair. But many people there are hoping his resignation will be a turning point and lead to the revival of a country that once held so much potential. Adefemi Akinsanya has more.
The morning after the historic night before, and people in Harare are optimistic their future without Robert Mugabe as president will bring prosperity.
The new leadership should create jobs and employment, and they must not revert back to the same system of leadership that we had. We do not expect the new leadership to be corrupt. That would disappoint people.
After a fortnight of dramatic stock dumping, which wiped more than $6 billion off Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, investment analysts say the decline stabilized on Wednesday. But it'll take a lot more progress to fully revive Zimbabwe's economy. The country will need to reintroduce its own currency, but it may take time for Zimbabweans to trust it. They've been using the US dollar since 2009, when its own currency was worth less than the paper it was printed on. It'll also need to figure out how to build its once thriving agriculture, mining, and manufacturing sectors. Despite having a highly educated population, unemployment is at 90%, with most Zimbabweans finding work in the informal sector. The cost of civil servants' wages account for 90% of government spending. And then there's the servicing of its debt. Zimbabwe owes lenders such as the IMF and World Bank about $9 billion. External debt accounts for 45% of GDP. Approaching Western creditors for debt relief is one option, but looking east has been the preferred choice for years. China has already built more than 100 infrastructure projects in Zimbabwe since 2000.
Our friendly policy towards Zimbabwe will not change. We want to continue to follow the principles of equality, mutual benefits, our win-win cooperation, and actively strengthen our exchanges and cooperation and elevate our bilateral relations.
The IMF predicts the Zimbabwean economy will grow 3.7% this year. And as the country prepares for Emmerson Mnangagwa to be sworn in as president on Friday, the people are hoping this will lead to a new chapter for Zimbabwe's economy. Adefemi Akinsanya, TRT World.
Let's get more analysis now. From Harare, let's join Derek Matyszak, a Senior Research Consultant at the Institute for Security Studies. Thank you very much, Derek, for joining us once again on Money Talks. Emmerson Mnangagwa, likely to be Zimbabwe's next leader. Do you see him making a radical change to Zimbabwe's political policies, or is it going to be business as usual?
I don't see that it can be business as usual. The economy is on the brink of a meltdown, and something has to be done, and something has to be done urgently. You mentioned in your intro the level of foreign debt owed by the government. You need to add to that a huge amount of domestic debt as well, which brings that percentage of debt against GDP up to around about 90%. This is clearly unsustainable. Civil servants' wages are gobbling over 90% of government revenue. And the country is entering into a hyperinflationary phase, which is going to cause extreme difficulties for the new government, and urgent measures are going to be required to address that. And that can only be done really through some sort of assistance from the international community. And this is going to require tough reforms by Emmerson Mnangagwa, and it's going to be very difficult for him to implement those because obviously people are looking for their lives to get better under Emmerson Mnangagwa, and a raft of austerity measures which are required are not going to be popular. So it's a very difficult situation that Mr. Mnangagwa will find himself in.
But many Zimbabweans have seen this movie before, though, Derek. I mean, if we rewind back to 1991, the structural adjustment programs that the IMF imposed on Zimbabwe, that didn't end well. But you're right, Zimbabwe cannot dig itself out of this hole without foreign help. So how does Zimbabwe learn from the lessons of the past and not repeat those mistakes?
Well, there are obvious macroeconomic reforms which are required, and they are of a different nature, really, to those imposed by the IMF structural adjustment program. There are obvious things that the Zimbabwean government can do to try and attract foreign direct investment. Since 2009, Zimbabwe's foreign direct investment has slowed to a trickle. It's attracting a fraction of the foreign direct investment that the neighboring countries are attracting. So some of the economically irrational policies implemented by Robert Mugabe, which he clung to doggedly and nobody dared to say no to him, these kind of policies need to be reversed.
Derek, do you see a potentially greater role for China, for example, to play in this new economy after Robert Mugabe? I mean, after all, if China comes in, the chances are they may not impose the same kinds of austerity measures that the IMF might.
Yes, but the Chinese input would be more in the form of investment and joint business partnerships. China has held its investment back, not entirely, but a large number of investments have been held back. And China has not been shy about saying the reason why they are holding back on investment is because of the potential instability in Zimbabwe, the political instability that was caused by Mugabe's grip on power and his refusal to address the succession issue. Now that this issue has been resolved, China might see a more pragmatic policy coming from Emmerson Mnangagwa, who historically has enjoyed good relations with the Chinese. They will see the resolution of the succession issue, right, and they might be willing to invest.
Right. Derek Matyszak, I'm afraid we are out of time, but thank you very much indeed for your time. Derek Matyszak from the Institute for Security Studies. Still ahead on Money Talks, fancy paying more for your favourite online movies or access to social media? Well, if proposed changes to the internet in the US go through, that is exactly what you may have to do. The details in a moment. But first, a quick roundup of the other top business stories from around the world in 60 seconds. Uber says it paid $100,000 to hide a massive data breach last year. Hackers stole information including names, email addresses and mobile phone numbers from about 57 million accounts of the ride-hailing service. CEO Dara Khosrowshahi says the discovery of the cover-up has resulted in the firing of 2 employees. Hong Kong's benchmark share index has closed above the 30,000 mark for the first time in more than a decade. Gains in technology and property stocks pushed the Hang Seng index higher. Hong Kong share prices plunged in the wake of the 2007 financial crisis. Since then, the collapse of mainland Chinese stocks held back share prices on the territory. Skype has disappeared from app stores in China. Microsoft removed the internet call and messaging service from Chinese stores after the country's government said they violated local laws. China has ordered companies to remove hundreds of apps that allow people to communicate confidentially. Soaring property prices have become a stinging political issue for many governments. In the UK, house prices have risen 70% over the last decade. Now, Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond, has unveiled his government's budget and waived government taxes or stamp duties for properties up to nearly $400,000 for the first-time buyers. But as Kristina Partsinevelos reports, those looking to take their first step on the property ladder are still likely to face an uphill struggle.
David and Barbara recently got engaged, and now they want to buy their first dream home in London. But it's not easy.
I think it's been about, we've been on this since March, really looking into houses, took a break around summer. I would say we probably have seen about just over 80 to 100 properties so far.
They're looking for a 2-bedroom home in Putney, south of London. The average price of a London home is $635,000, and a large deposit is needed, making buying a home out of reach for many.
The prices were so high, the amount that we'd have to put down were so much that we just couldn't bear it.
Across the UK, high costs and limited availability are frustrating millennials attempting to get their foot on the property ladder. But Chancellor Philip Hammond used his budget to lure back young voters who have recently been deserting the Conservative Party.
Building the homes that will make good on our promise to the next generation, but crucially, also helping families to cope with the cost of living.
Hammond announced plans to provide $59 billion of capital funding to boost construction, build 300,000 new homes per year in England, and cut the stamp duty for first-time buyers. All in an effort to increase home ownership, but some experts say reducing the stamp duty is only part of the solution.
It's not a silver bullet. It won't fundamentally change the housing market, but it should help activity today, and it should help some buyers who are on the margins, who can't quite afford to buy, with that last little bit of extra saving.
Stamp duty is widely seen as an outdated levy on property purchases and is blamed for dragging the housing market. David and Barbara are pleased it's being reduced.
I think it will help buyers. I think it'll help people have more capital to be able to put down on their deposit and spend on things that are real and hold their value, rather than a once-off stamp duty that you pay and then you never see that money again.
They've just put an offer on a 2-bedroom home and are waiting to find out if it beat out the competition.
That's perhaps my dream. I want to get married and live in a house that's going to be mine and just start my family from there.
Along with many other aspiring homeowners, Barbara and David are hoping these budget measures will help them achieve their dream. Kristina Partsinevelos, TRT World, London.
Let's go to London now, and joining me from there is Jasmine Birtles. She's a personal finance expert and a well-known British TV and radio personality. Jasmine, great to have you on Money Talks once again. What were the main highlights of Chancellor Hammond's budget for you?
Well, as you say, it was the stamp duty. This is all part of Hammond's attempt, in fact, the Tory party's, the Conservative Party's attempt to win back the young voter. And the young voters have left in droves, very largely because they haven't got a good way to buy a house that they can afford, and even their rent has gone up. So he announced a raft of measures that he's going to implement to help free up some property, to make people build more and therefore increase the housing stock, which should bring down the price of housing in this country, which, as your report showed, is quite extreme now.
Let's look at the housing market. Now, the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, says reducing stamp duty will simply inflate housing prices all over again and lead to higher inflation for the country as a whole. How is Chancellor Hammond going to square that particular circle?
Well, very good point. And this is what millennials are already saying. They're saying, yeah, nice to be given a little bit off the stamp duty, but firstly, that's going to increase the price overall of housing in this country. And also, they're saying it still doesn't help with the enormous deposit that they have to find. On average, in London, certainly, the average deposit they have to find is about £37,000. That's about $45,000. That's a huge amount of money. So for millennials, again, I think this budget's been a little bit of a damp squib. It seemed like a really good idea to start off with, but just a half an hour or so later, millennials were already saying, big deal.
Well, that's a very good point, and it actually leads me to my next question, because a lot of millennials are actually saying they don't really want to own property. They don't even want to own cars or furniture or stuff like that. Is the government barking up the wrong tree here? Should they instead be trying to stimulate the economy in many other ways and make things more affordable in other ways?
Well, I think you've got a very good point there, yes. Certainly he has tried to make some, to give some help to businesses, particularly small businesses. He mentioned quite decent investment into technological companies, electric cars, this sort of thing. He's removing some of the horrible business rates that have harmed quite a lot of companies, small businesses, particularly retail especially. But really, I think something that I would like to hear from this government is rent controls. Because, as you say, a lot of millennials like to rent. A lot of people really like to rent and rent all sorts of things, including their own home. But in this country, there aren't rent controls if you are renting privately. If you're if you're renting from the council, there are controls. But a lot of people rent privately, and much of the time that's stopping them save for a house if they want to, because they are so high, the rents are so high.
Jasmine Birtles, personal finance expert, thank you ever so much for your time. Now, internet providers deciding which internet sites you can visit doesn't sound too good, right? Well, the US Federal Communications Commission could soon give them the power to do just that and more by scrapping a so-called net neutrality law that ensures free and open internet access. Let's take a look.
So too, as we go about eliminating a rule here and a rule there, we will end up substantially adjusting our rules to match the realities of the modern marketplace. And that is something that is good for consumers and good for companies alike.
Joe McNamee joins us now from Brussels. He's the Executive Director of European Digital Rights. That's an association of civil and human rights organisations from across Europe, and they defend the rights and freedoms in the digital environment. Joe, great to have you on Money Talks. Let's talk about net neutrality in the US. What would ending net neutrality over there mean for consumers over there?
Quite simply, it would mean getting less and paying more for it. It would lead to fewer and fewer new services being brought onto the market, less innovation, and higher costs for lower quality.
A lot of advocates of net neutrality point to the example of Portugal, which has this dual track system for providing internet services. Explain to us what the situation is in Portugal. Do consumers over there end up paying a lot more for things like Netflix, for example?
What has happened in Portugal is that the companies in Portugal have exploited a loophole in Europe's net neutrality laws to basically package up the internet in small packages, so you get a lower download limit, but you can access particular services such as Netflix or Facebook outside that limit. So you end up having customers or consumers being pushed into having not an internet service, but a bit of the internet service, which is bad for competition, bad for choice, bad for innovation, and ultimately bad for the consumers that use those services.
Right, so bad for innovation, bad for competition. Would the end of net neutrality then stifle that very competitive environment that actually created the likes of Google and YouTube, for example, in the US?
Well, ending net neutrality is ripping the heart and soul out of what the internet is. The internet is a success for business and for consumers because it allows everybody to connect to everybody on an equal footing. Removing that equality, removing that openness is destroying the engine of innovation and freedom of expression that the internet has been for the last 2 decades.
So why do it then?
Quite simply, because a very small number of telecoms companies see a short-term benefit. They see themselves as a gateway between the internet and their customers. And if they can charge the internet a fee to access their customers, while charging their customers a fee to access the internet, then they get paid twice for doing one thing. It sets up a few companies to be the gatekeepers, and it allows them to sell their customers' their customers' access to their customers to the highest bidder.
Now, earlier this week, we saw the Department of Justice suing to block AT&T's bid to buy Time Warner on the grounds that consumers would end up paying more for their TV bills. And yet we're seeing this move by the FCC to end net neutrality, which may actually end up doing the exact same thing. There seems to be a big contradiction in what the Trump administration is trying to do. Is that how you see it as well, or are these two very different issues?
These are quite fundamentally different issues. The markets are different, and the scale of ironically, the scale of the damage that would be caused by ending net neutrality, which the administration supports, is vastly bigger than the scale of the damage that would be caused by the merger that they're trying to oppose.
Right. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Joe McNamee from the European Digital Rights Organization. Thank you. DNA testing has moved from the lab to your lounge. The world's consumer genetic testing market is expected to be worth $340 million by 2020. So we sent Matt Gooderick to find out how the industry works, what we can discover about ourselves from our own genes, and how companies can use the data.
Giving power to the people. The rise of the consumer genetics test should come as no surprise. Lower pricing and greater accessibility means it's now easier than ever to take one of these tests. 23andMe offer kits that claim to provide a range of genetic information, including potential health risks, carrier status of certain inherited diseases, and other traits. The company is worth almost $2 billion, according to a recent valuation by TechCrunch. That's after raising $250 million in funding that will go towards drug development.
For 23andMe, we've been able to demonstrate to regulatory bodies the test is 99% or greater accurate, and that the information can be understood by individuals.
I took the test, and while it suggests I'm unlikely to develop Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease, it did detect a genetic variant of age-related macular degeneration, the most common cause of vision loss among older adults. 23andMe don't offer anyone to discuss the results with. And for some, that's one of the problems with this growing industry.
The most difficult thing about genetic testing is the interpretation of the results. We have had some examples of some individuals who've been told that they have an increased risk of breast cancer. When my colleagues have gone and checked that in detail in their laboratory, they found that that genetic change wasn't there at all.
It's not just a curious look into the makeup of your own DNA that's prompting people to take these tests. The global skincare industry is predicted to be worth around $135 billion by 2021. And this same logic is being applied to beauty. DNA analysis is helping identify strengths and weaknesses in the skin, and that information is being used to predict how people might age and what they can do to slow its effects. But as consumers hand over their DNA, there are concerns about what companies are doing with the information. A number of medical professionals are calling for tighter regulation, particularly in the health sector. But for now, that's unlikely to hold back the at-home DNA test industry.
There's no sort of magic solution, there's no magic DNA bullet that's suddenly going to give you all the answers. But I think this idea that we can sort of take this saliva swab and it might tell us why we're not sleeping or why we're not losing weight is really, really interesting for people.
And more personalised data could mean more opportunities for big brands, potentially unlocking a huge amount of untapped business. Matt Gooderick for TRT World.
And if you have any stories you'd like our reporters to look into, tweet me at Azhar Sukri. And that's all from Money Talks for now, from me and the team in Istanbul. Thanks for watching.